Creative Assembly have just released their new plans for Total War Pharaoh, and it sparked a lot of interest. The game itself hasn't been a total success, with extremely low numbers in sales and in players. All of this caused Pharaoh to have an early death, or so we thought. CA announced the latest update for Pharaoh, and it's a big one. But is it enough to save the game, or has CA played their ace too late? Before we talk about the update itself, why are so many people interested in the update? This comes down to historical legacy, to a game in CA's past, and that would be Total War Alexander. I would not be surprised if you hadn't heard of this game. It's an addition to the already successful Rome Total War series. It only has 4 factions: Macedon, Persia, Barbarians, I can't remember their name, and the Indians. This doesn't make it a bad game though, but probably put next to Barbarian Invasion, it seems underwhelming. But it does have something that Barbarian Invasion doesn't have, and that is Expedition. This game is all about the conquests of Alexander and the establishment of his empire across the Middle East, Asia Minor, all the way to the borders of India. And this is something that was only really replicated again in Napoleon Total War with the Italian campaign, the Egyptian campaign, mainly because they were story-driven narratives which directed the player one way. And this is what I think Total War Pharaoh could pick up on. Can you become Alexander before he does? That sounds a little weird, but it may work. This is where Total War Alexander and Pharaoh kind of part ways. Alexander was about a real conquest and seeing if you were up to the challenge. It was all about pitting you against Alexander's achievements. But Pharaoh is more of a mosh pit of different factions, and that's just because of the time period. That's absolutely fine. And this can be good. It leaves avenues for the players to create their own story. But this lack of direction can make the player feel like they are fighting without an objective. Now, you'll quite rightly point out that the game's objective is to become Pharaoh and survive the Bronze Age collapse. And what you'll notice on this map is that the Mycenaeans were almost completely wiped out in central Greece during the Bronze Age collapse, with a lot of major cities being destroyed. However, because Pharaoh's campaign map is downscaled significantly from the Troy campaign map in Greece, it's unclear how this will be replicated and how it will play out. There's 2 Greek and 2 Eastern factions added. The 2 Eastern factions are the Persians and the Babylonians, which are interesting as well, but they lean on similar styles of warfare to their neighbours, and I think that's the crucial part. Yes, they're interesting factions, yes, they'll have cool technology, yes, they may even have some cool units, but all their units can be very similar to their neighbours, and they've tried to discern between the 2. Babylon is going to be very, very much a low quality infantry supported by units that buff their stats, and Syria is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to have lots of elite infantry but in smaller numbers. They've tried to pit them off against each other in this way, and that's a good starting position, that's a good starting matchup to have, I think. But after that, after you've defeated one or the other, you're going to be fighting very similar styles of warfare for the rest of the game. And with the Greeks, that's not the case. They fight extremely differently. They have heavy, shielded, disciplined infantry, dominance in melee combat but lacking maneuverability. And so you have these 2 major cultures clashing, just like in Days of Alexander, when Alexander invaded Persia. And the Trojans, even though they are a Greek faction, they are a hybrid, but I think a lot of people will be expecting the Mycenaeans to have such a different style of warfare that it's going to change the game for them. And just like in Troy, if they had a playable Eastern style faction, you would want to pit your completely different style of warfare as the Eastern faction against the massive ranks of the hoplites. This isn't because one is better than the other, not at all, but 2 different styles of warfare make the game finally intriguing for new players, especially myself. This also brings me to the question of win conditions for the Greeks. As you notice from the map, the Greek islands and the Balkans and all that area are a lot smaller than the original Troy game, and so conquering it is not going to be a difficult feat in context, is it? And so how long do you stay in Greece fighting out with other Greeks until finally you're the last Greek faction left? And how long is that going to take? Is it going to take 20 turns, 30 turns, 40 turns? How can it take longer than that? They're so tightly packed, and there's not many factions in that area. So what's their win condition? Is it to take over Greece? That would be the most boring game ever. It's like you're playing Troy but on a smaller scale. What's the point? Their win condition has got to be like take Asia Minor, but it's not very historical, and so you're sort of becoming a little bit like, are we stretching the Greeks too far? How much story can you really add into it? The player has to generate their own story. Taking Agamemnon to the Far East would be quite an achievement, I think, and would definitely be an interesting objective, but are they going to include that in the game? I don't think so. Is their win condition to become the Pharaoh? I mean, that's everyone else's win condition, but it's a little bit on the nose, isn't it? Maybe that's what you want. And this is going to be a game that has huge sandbox potential, I think. but does it have enough historical precedent to make the game enjoyable for the historical fans which it's marketed towards? With Warhammer, you can be a lot more fluid because there is no historical precedent apart from in lore, which is very, very fluid in itself. But in this game, you're basing it on real people and real experiences. Does it have the depth to really go beyond the initial borders? I don't know. For me, this will be determined, this is my personal opinion, based upon whether the Greeks have enough pressure behind them to expand and be threatened. Because if they can just sit in Greece for the whole game and not be threatened at all, then the game's... This doesn't really give any incentive for me to move out of Greece, apart from my own personal conquests. There's one more big feature to this update, and that is the addition of 25 minor playable factions. Now, not much is known of these factions except they exist, and someone has written a very vague sentence about their strengths and weaknesses. And to be honest, I don't know enough about them to comment on them, but it does make me wonder if they plan to add these into the game more fleshed out with more content later on. Because as the post specifies, the minor factions are borrowing a lot of culture from the already existing factions. And this is fine, but it makes you wonder what this game might have been if launch had been received better. I want to just have a quick look at the actual document as well, because there are some interesting points mentioned. So let's start with Assyria here. If I type Assyria into Google, what do you see? It's these winged, I'm not quite sure what the animal is, but they're still winged, bearded creatures. I'm not quite sure what the name is. If I type Assyrian emblem in, I don't know what bird this is, but I'm assuming it's some sort of eagle-like bird. Eagle, 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 eagle. And so I was extremely surprised when they chose a bread basket. I don't want to play as the bread baskets. I want to play as the eagles. Yes, anyway, moving on for that design. That's probably more historically accurate than the eagles. I don't care. But I've wanted to point out this interesting thing. Let me just read it to you. What's interesting about this faction leader is that he's adopted the name of his favourite god, Nin-Urta, as part of his own name. Now, it's not interesting, let's be honest. Why is that even here? Cool, he has a cool name. What I was expecting to be at the end of his sentence was that he has a special ability to do this. Nope, his name has part of his name in it. I don't know. If that's historically accurate, that's fine. But it's not interesting, is it? Also, let's just talk about these photos, these screenshots of the units. I'm going to put on the screen now some other past Total War units that have been released. I'm just looking at these. I'm thinking, this is so lazy. Look at it. Literally just gone down, quick screen grab and gone back up again. Look at that. What kind of framing is that? The sun's pointed the wrong way. It's very dark. You can't even see what weapon he's holding. I mean, let's be honest. Do you think that this is just copied from the in-game text already? Do you think someone wrote this? Or did they copy it from in the game? This strikes me very, very lazy. This is more like what I expected Assyria to be like. Bread basket for me just doesn't do it. This is probably the best picture there is. This is the next Babylonian one. I don't get it. Like, what is happening? These two have the same, it's basically the same face. His eyebrows are slightly different. Like, there's the same face there, you can kind of see. Why have you cut his feet off? What's he even holding? Are we going to see his shield? No, we don't get to see what he's holding in his hand. And also, let's just comment on this a minute. What is a Babylonian specialist? What are they going to do exactly? They're going to throw potions. Are they going to be like the druids from the original Rome game? Like, they're going to buff units. Let's be honest. That's what they're going to do. Are they going to scare, intimidate other units? They're going to provide morale boosts or morale decreases to enemy units? Why not just give them some shock infantry? There we go. Problem solved. Rather than having, weird people that stand behind your infantry and make them better. There's just no way that this guy here is going to improve this guy by standing behind him in any way. How is he going to improve his combat efficiency by standing there without a weapon? I mean, it says a utility unit equipped with a variety of special skills but limited combat capabilities. So they're not combat specialists, which you'd expect them to be, because that would make sense, right? But they're not. So what are we going to do? Are they engineers? Are they going to build things on the battlefield? I doubt it. If they do, awesome. What are they going to do? Build a wall and these guys are going to sit behind them and then they're going to die. Maybe a misplay here, but I don't know. I'll have to wait and see. Mysians. Again, just strikes me as lazy. What formation even is this? Also, they all look the same. Some of them have shorter crests than other ones, guys. Trying to see if that's a club. Do you think that's an axe? Is that like a pointed club? Oh, it is an axe. You can barely see the axe. It almost looks like an Assassin's Creed axe. That is bizarre. I don't know if that's historically accurate. I hope it is. These guys have exactly the same face standing next to each other. Seriously, I get you have to have similar armor bit sets, but having one with webbed armor and one with not is not going to help distinguish each soldier, is it? But we'll have to wait and see. Trojans. Let's just have a look at this picture here. Oh my gosh. I mean, the unit looks cool. Sure, that's great. That's not what I'm talking about though. What is this picture? Like, this is your central figure right here. His spears off the screen, not even a full body image. Just doesn't give me hope that this is taken seriously. This is my favorite one. Obviously they've got like horns. I think it's like horns of Midas maybe. What does this remind you of? Elves. It just does. This is the last thing I want to point out. There is a Discord Q&A. I think the question that's going to be most asked is, what's the game span look like? Is it going to be this faction added? Is it going to be that faction added? But because they've added so many of these minor factions, I don't reckon there's going to be much scope for the game left. We'll have to see how popular this is. And also, this last line here, in the next blog post, will provide more information about the new battle features. How much more can you invent for melee combat system? I think that's going to be underwhelming. I hope not, but I think it is. Let me just give you an example. When Alexander faced Darius, I can't remember which one this was, Darius set up his chariots days beforehand. He even got his guys to clear a path on the battlefield to make it smooth for his chariots to run on. That's the level of strategy we're talking about in real time, but in this game it's all very, very surface level. I don't think there's going to be like an extra fast chariot route that you can place on the battlefield. That's the kind of level of strategy that we're talking about in the Bronze Age. Chariots are extremely difficult to use. They can't just run around the battlefield and do stuff like they can in this game. They're very, very much a direct glass cannon, which Darius fails to use correctly, but he sets them up for success. And in this game, that's not even represented at all. How much can you make archer melee combat interesting? And Magritte's going to form square. I mean, this is not Napoleon. Having not played the game myself, I'm not going to comment on how the game runs as a game, but I think this is definitely a way to bring new players in. If the update's good, it could make this game actually likable. This is a map of Troy, the game. As you can see, Greece is split into, must be 10 to 15 different regions. You have all these islands, which are occupiable. Crete, the start of Asia Minor here. You have Thrace, and the start of the Balkans up here, and you have Constantinople, Istanbul area. All that is included in this game. Now, let me just show you this, which is the new updated map for Total War Pharaoh. Someone has very adequately put the original map and placed over the new released graphic. As you can see, Greece is small. As you can see from the blog post, barely anything really. I doubt these islands are going to be occupiable. I reckon this is like one whole area you can occupy. We're talking very limited scope for Greece. Like, this is just one, few factions here. All in all then, I'm interested in the update, but I bet a lot of people like myself will wait until they see gameplay, content and reviews from creators especially before buying the game once that review embargo has been dropped. It really depends, for me at least, how heavily they lean into the Greeks. I love the Greek culture and I love the Roman culture as my two main focuses. It really depends on how interesting that is, how interesting they are compared to the other Eastern and African factions.